Hello and welcome back to Story Impact. I'm your host, Lisa Tolles. Everyone loves a good story, but what about the storytellers? I started this podcast to give authors a platform, a place for them to share their vision, their process, and the purpose behind their work. In this series, we're exploring where their inspiration comes from and what drives them forward day after day. In addition to hosting the series, I'm also a crime novelist, and you can find my books on Amazon and at lisatolles.com. All right, let's get into the stories behind the stories. I'm delighted to host my friend Erik Foge today, an award-winning historical and speculative fiction author celebrated for his high-stakes thrillers and seamless blend of time travel, wartime espionage, and alternate realities. Erik holds a bachelor's degree in history with an emphasis on Russian history and politics, and his passion for history and espionage was sparked at age 14 during a captivating trip to Washington, D.C. Today, he's here to talk about his work and how he crafts his incredibly cinematic, suspenseful tales. Erik, warmest welcome.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for having me.
All right, so I want to hear about that fateful trip to Washington, D.C. that you took as a kid. I mean, the way you describe it, it seems like that experience had a lot of influence in shaping your career as an author.
Yes, the funny thing is my first choice of a career was not being an author, but my parents sent me to Washington, D.C. when I was 14 to learn history without them. And they had a driver, drive me to different locations. And one of my places I went to was the Capitol building. And this four-foot kid with a backpack walking back and forth trying to find the chambers where Congress is. And you see this DC cop doing this like a tennis match. And eventually he says, "Kid, what are you doing?" "Oh, I'm trying to find the chambers." You just passed him, 6 times. Oh, thanks. Turned my back on him and looked inside. I said, "Well, this is really cool," et cetera, et cetera. And finally I found a tap on my back. He says, "Where's your parents?" And I said, "Well, they're not here." He said, "Well, where are they?" "Florida." He said, "Excuse me?" I said, "Yeah, Florida, the peninsula state." He says, "Yeah, quit being smart." I said, "Well, my driver's going to pick up lunch. He's going to pick me up in 30 minutes. And, he was protective of me. So he took me downstairs, down in the armory.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was the neatest thing ever. I'm like, wow, because no one sees this unless you have authorization to go down there.
So he trusted you, this guy, that you weren't there for nefarious purposes or to create mayhem.
If you saw me, you would not, you'll just think this guy's a dork. This kid's a dork. He's a history nerd. And, even my driver said that. He said, "Go ahead, test him." And my driver was able to get me into the Pentagon. I thought that was really cool too.
Wow.
And like I said, my first calling was working for the government. That's why I took, Russian history, Russian politics.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. And I was approached by a government agency when I was just a senior in college. But things didn't work out. And I'm still friends with my recruiter who's helped me with my books.
Mm.
And long story short, I said, "Hey, I like time travel. I like World War II." And I was approached by this government agency who I always wanted to work for since I was like middle school.
Mm-hmm.
And I combined all three. And that's how the spark really became a fire.
Wow. All right, so your Project Pegasus series is a blend of espionage, time travel, high-stakes warfare, where CIA senior analyst Dr. Erik Foge, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Either, yes.
Foge, okay, is thrust into covert missions where he must manipulate history during World War II to prevent the Nazi victory, all while facing rogue operatives from his own timeline determined to stop him. What is the mechanism for time travel in this series, and how does all that work?
Well, versus having you, because so many movies will have saying like H.G. Wells, and I believe this movie was From Time to Time or Time After Time. You get a machine and you transport back or forward, wherever it might be. This is just a big box. Think of, I'm going to date ourselves now, Quantum Leap, when Sam Beckett walked into the chamber and he goes back in time. That's how he goes back in time. However, he doesn't take on a person of that time frame. He is himself. So
Mm.
it's the means to get there. Think
Mm.
of an elevator. You're trying to get to the third floor. Well, you get an elevator, you press 3 and you're there. That's probably the best way to describe it in a nutshell.
But where does your I realize that that you do a tremendous amount of research for your books. I've read your books and I know that you have a history background and a history degree, so you're being very copious about that. But the sci-fi aspects of it, where did your interest in sci-fi come from?
Well, the movie The Final Countdown dealt with Kirk Douglas, dealt with the Nimitz going back in time before Pearl Harbor.
Mm,
And they had a moral dilemma to stop the Japanese or not. And unfortunately, they were not able to, and things, stayed the same. However, one of the characters was stuck back in time, and he made what Navy is, who is today. Also, I'm going to date myself even further. Star Trek, the original one with Captain Kirk and Spock. When McCoy went back in time, he altered history because he saved someone.
mm,
Once again, the Nazis won. And of course, at the end of the show, of course, Captain Kirk told so like McCoy says to Kirk, do you know what you have done? Because the person that should be killed was killed. Because if she wasn't killed, like I said, the Nazis would have won. And that's a big moral dilemma, which I sometimes put in my books.
mm-hmm,
Because you might think, hey, I'll just go back in time and save Hitler. Well, I mean,
mm-hmm,
save him or kill him. And guess what? That could have altered history dramatically.
right. Mm-hmm. I'm a huge Star Trek fan, and I've seen many of the different series, and that's really kind of a theme is that when they go back or go forward in time, it's critically important that they not do anything to impact the timeline, not talk to anyone, not touch anything, not change anything, because the trickle down of that, I mean, there's just no telling, right?
Mm-hmm. And on the same token, like I said, my time series books, I make it sort of like Back to the Future because if you make the event correct, then everything should go back to normal, or as
Mm-hmm.
normal as perceived as we know it as today.
Mm-hmm. Where'd you get the idea for the Dr. Erik Foge character?
Me, because he has my personality, he has my wit, he likes history. He is a nerd, except I don't have his martial arts skills or shooting skills and all that. Because my wife and other people say, "Hey, this sounds like it." Well, surprise, it is.
Well,
He's
you might not have a martial arts background, but I did notice earlier in our call that you have swords on your wall behind you. Tell me about those.
Those were my grandfathers. He was in the Marine Corps for
Wow.
over 40 years.
Wow.
So,
All
and
right.
he's in my third book.
I was wondering, yeah, so that's your connection to the military. Interesting.
Well, also I had family that fought for the Germans during World War II as well.
Wow.
So I have both sides.
All right, so looking at kind of the evolution of this Project Pegasus series, what does Erik care about the most? What's the deep motivation that, despite all the challenges you put him through in these books, keeps him driving forward, story after story?
Well, he wants to preserve history, or keep it as is. As he says, things were meant to happen once; they should stay the same.
Mm-hmm.
Because like you mentioned earlier, if you just change one thing, for example, I'm going to bring up Back to the Future because it's people can visualize it. When we first see the mall, it says Tripon Tripine Mall, and of course after Marty comes back in time, it says Twin Pine Mall because he knocked out one of the pines from back in time. So you try to, I mean, that might be minor, but now imagine if, like I said, going back in time and killing Hitler during World War One. Okay, so people say, well, World War Two wouldn't happen. You don't know that for a fact.
Mm-hmm.
It
Mm-hmm.
could have been worse, or someone more radical could have came horrible.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or better yet, America could never became a superpower, and Germany came landed on the moon first. So it's you got to think of those things that give you little chills.
I love your imagination. You're just like, there are no guardrails. You're like, what if this and what if that? But I mean your books are not I mean they're believable the way you lay it out. I mean you're very careful at kind of plotting these. Let me ask you about that actually. We talk a lot about plotters and pantsers. A plotter is someone who like, creates a very detailed outline of the book and then writes it after that. A pantser just flies by the seat of their pants, no outline, and they just put fingers to the keyboard and start and see where it takes them. Where are you in that?
Well, that's really hard to say because what I have to do first when I write my books, I have to find a pivotal point in history, how history would have changed either way, for the good or the worse. And I believe you read Horizons Without Boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
and that one the first part deals with a bunch of German bombers getting lost over England, and they bombed London by accident.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what happened in real life. In my book, before he goes back in time, London was never bombed. Therefore, the Germans win, the Battle of Britain. And what's so critical about that, like I said, the real life, the bombers did bomb London, and because of that, Churchill bombed Berlin 3 nights in a row, and therefore Hitler decided to bomb London from there on out versus the factories and airfields.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, the RAF, the Royal Air Force, was able to muster up again and defeat the Luftwaffe, which is the German Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
So just like I said, just small little things in history could just change just dramatically.
Mm.
That's why I'm neither a plotter or someone that flies the seat in my pants when I write.
Mm-hmm.
I have to find a realistic event and make it more challenging for the character to try to solve.
Mm. So much going on there.
Yeah, you should see how I think 24/7.
Yeah, I imagine you probably have whiteboards in your writing space, and I'd love to see what those whiteboards look like. You know, every
Actually, the whiteboard is in my mind. My wife says, "Your mind's very scary. I do not want to walk in there."
Oh, funny. Um, so what would you say is the most rewarding part of being a writer? Or if you feel like sharing, what are some challenges that you've overcome on your journey so far?
I mean, when I started writing, you have to have a thick skin, because there's all these people say, "Hey, you should tweak it this way or expand on the characters like that." I say, you have in your mind about this character or your book this way, but you also are sometimes too close to it. So you have to have beta readers saying, "Hey, can you add to this? Can you delete this or whatever?" And I actually had that happen. I wrote One Way Roads. I was really excited. I got at 47,000 words, and One Way Roads was, like I said, my first novel I wrote. So I decided to go to Google and say, "Hey, what's the average length of a novel?" Between 120, 100, between 80 to 120,000 words. I went, ugh. So I had to keep on writing. But when I wrote that book, a lot of fans says, "Hey," in the chapter says he was with the agency for 10 years. He was dating his girlfriend for years. Can you elaborate on that? And of course, as me being a little smart aleck, I said, "Well, can you use your imagination?" And they said, "No, we want to see it. We want to know more about him." So
Mm.
that was a blessing in disguise. Even though I didn't have that planned,
Uh-huh.
that was a challenge. Now I have to think of a backstory. Now the funny thing with that story, in the first chapter is 1990. The
Mm-hmm.
second chapter is 97. And I had fans now saying, "Hey, there's a gap there. What happened?"
Mm.
Because you said he is going to work for the Navy as a civilian, as a junior analyst, and the next chapter you have him as he's being approached by the government to work for them.
That's
So the book I'm currently writing now is set to quote
okay. Filling in that gap.
deals that covers the 7 years, and this will be the last book in the series.
I think it's wonderful that you have readers that are invested enough in the story and what happens to the character that they're asking for more. They're saying,
Mhm.
peel this back, and I want to see what happened between this period and that period because they want to learn more about the character. I see that as really good news. I mean, yes, you're right. You do have to have a thick skin, accepting critiques and feedback from people. I mean, you have to accept it in the spirit of they're trying to help me. They're trying to make the story more readable. But that's great that you've had that feedback. Keep going.
Well, the fun, one of the feedback I got with my new book, I had a person in the Navy, a great friend of mine. I'm going to call him. Hi, Mike. How you doing? And he did cryptology in the Navy.
Mm.
And then about 10 years ago, I met an older gentleman, and he worked for the CIA. He didn't tell me that at first, but when they both heard some chapters and just set the protocol because I wanted their feedback, they said, "You made me feel like I was in my youth again,
Mm.
doing my job."
Mm.
I had, like, for example, Mike, that was the Navy. I described a character dissecting a electronic bug, trying to peel it apart with, the tools and all that. He said, "You put me back in my training days."
Mm.
And with the guy that worked for the agency, he said when he was leaving, reading about the polygraph test, he says, "How you describe the uniforms, how you describe the mannerisms of the characters, the officers in the Navy, you made me feel like I was right there back again when I was 18."
Mm. That's
So,
wonderful. So you did your research and that felt authentic to them.
and I asked him if, hey, can you write a small, 2, 3 paragraphs so I can put in front of this new book,
Right.
because I thought that would show a lot of credibility as a writer.
Absolutely. Yeah, we can have readers provide feedback and write reviews on Amazon, but especially with your books, having someone who's in that industry, someone with that background that says, yes, this is realistic, that gives it tremendous reader credibility and industry credibility. So that's great. Um, I want to ask you about I don't know that much about your publishing journey, but I wanted to ask how you feel about what's changed across the publishing landscape over the last 5 to 10 years. I mean, yes, there are a lot more opportunities than there used to be, but what's your take on all that's happened and kind of where it is right now?
I always tell people you have to make sure if you go with a publisher, a large publisher or say mid-sized publisher, make sure you do your homework on them because they're in the business of making money. And I hate to say it, sometimes they don't care about you, even though they say they might. Because I remember one time this one huge firm in New York, I think it was Kingston. Don't quote me on that. This lady says, "Hey, I'm really interested in one way roads. Can you send me the full novel?" So I was really excited.
Of course.
And so then she ghosted me out of the blue, which was really sad. It's like, hey, what happened?
Hmm.
I mean, at least tell me that you don't like the story.
Mm-hmm.
I would have been better off with that.
Yeah.
Then, a small publishing house approached me and said, "Hey, we like this. Would you be interested in working, with us?" So I asked some people around, "Hey, have you heard of this agency?" They say, "Run, don't deal with
Oh,
them."
wow. Oh, wow. Okay.
So, as as a beginning writer, you have to make sure you're doing your homework.
Yeah.
And so then I went through the long process trying to find agencies, not agencies, sorry, publishers that don't require agents.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I say that's what's sad about beginning authors like you and I and others out there. We could have amazing stories, but our last name is not Kardashian, Clinton, Obama, Trump, whatever, because they will publish them with any book they have. They could publish a book, How to Make Toast, and it will be a bestseller. Yet our novels are really in deep, in depth. We have great characters, and no agent will look at us and say, "Well, you don't have 2 million followers. Who are you? You're nobody." But I have a great story,
Yeah. Yeah,
and
you really have to believe, you really have to believe in yourself. I think that's a really important part of asking for feedback from people. That's what we were talking about earlier. I mean, yeah, you really have to have a strong sense of self and your vision and where you want to go with your books, knowing that the people that that provide feedback, they're going to help you kind of like refine and tighten it up. But yeah.
Yeah, because right now I do have a producer reviewing my 4 books.
A
Will something come of it?
freelancer? That's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah. I mean, it's a good step, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And my wife said this because I sent them about I think 2 3 weeks ago, and my first email to them was like, "Hey, can I set up a meeting and talk to you about my books?" And the producer, not her assistant, but the producer said, "Hey, send your books in the mail, and we would like to review them." So I
Mm,
sent them. About 2 weeks later, I say, "Hey, did you receive the books? They came by UPS. Yes, we're reviewing them. We'll keep in touch."
okay.
So, as my wife said this, if they weren't interested in your books at the latest, I can't speak English now, getting tongue tied, they would not respond right away because they could have just brushed you off,
I
which
think
is
she's absolutely right. I think if they weren't interested or even potentially interested, they wouldn't contact you back at all. I mean, like these executives are just too busy to be wasting time on that. So I mean, they obviously see some value in that. So I think that's wonderful that you have to have that visibility that they're reading your books right now.
Mhm. Well, I will tell you this also, for anyone who's just beginning a book, the way I describe writing a book is you have your backpack, say all your skill sets, all your story thoughts in a backpack. And
Hmm.
in front of you is a huge labyrinth. And you walk in there and you're overwhelmed. So you keep on walking, walking, drinking water, walking, walking, and you got 25% of the maze done. And you notice that the 100 people that were with you, there's less people now, about say 90 or whatever. So you feel say, hey, I feel good, so you keep on walking.
Hmm.
You get halfway. Guess what? When you get halfway, you turn around, there's even less people.
Hmm.
And you're like, I don't know if I can do this. This is too much. This is overwhelming. I have a full-time job. I go to school full-time, whatever. And so you say, you know what? Some people say, you know what? I'm just going to quit. It's not worth it. Of course, crazy people like you and I say, hey, I'm still going forward.
Right.
So you get to the 75% mark. Well, guess what? There's even less people with you now.
Hmm.
And you said, you know what? I can't stop now. I'm so close to the edge of exiting the maze. Why not? So guess what? You made it out of the maze. You finished your book. You got published or wherever, and you feel really good. But as you and I think you have 4 books out. I have 4 books out. Guess what? There's another maze in front of us. We have to go through the maze again.
Yeah, that's right. Erik, what do you now know about the process of writing books that you wish you knew when you were just starting out?
I would tell people, when you're writing a book, you don't have to do an outline. You don't have to be spontaneous, but write something that the audience will love. Like, for example, I write, like you said, historical aspect of fiction. You write crime fiction. But if you're going to write an off the topic book, your audience is going to be very small. So if you want to do this as a career, you make sure you pick a topic that people will enjoy reading.
Mm-hmm.
Also, like I said, have thick skin. Don't be discouraged. I got 40 rejection letters after the big publisher never ghosted me. And eventually someone said, hey, I like what we see. And they had a good background, the publishing house. And I said, let's go for it.
So, what kind of advice would you give to a writer who has that backpack and they're at like the 85% mark through this tangled labyrinth to keep them going? What encouragement would you tell like a novice writer doing this for the first time with all the challenges and all the uncertainty?
Well, I would say just keep on going. You have to keep blowing yourself away. And if you're at the 85% mark and out of blue, you know how the ending is. Write your ending. Because if you don't, you're going to forget how it is.
Hmm.
Once you have that ending, you have the 85% mark here,
Mm-hmm.
it's easy to come together.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'll tell you something silly. I was probably 2/3 done with Horizons Without Boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And I was still working for corporate America. And my wife came to me. She said, "Why don't you quit your job and live your dream?" And we were able to do that. So I was very blessed.
That's all.
So I gave my 2 week notice, and within those 2 weeks, one night I woke up around 3:30, and she was panicked. She said, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And I went, "Yeah, I have an idea for book 4," and that was methods between methods and madness.
Ah.
And she said, "You haven't finished book 3 yet."
Mm-hmm.
I said, "I know, but there's going to be book 4." So at the end of my 2 weeks notice, I started writing book 4 and
Yeah.
finished book 4 in 14 months, the first draft.
Mm.
And then I revised it in a whole 9 yards, then went back to finish book 3.
Mm.
So if it's fresh in your head, you write it down. Even Stephen King said that. He even says, if you know how chapters 1, 2, 3, 4 are, and then you know how chapter 8 is,
Mm-hmm.
write chapter 8. Because if you don't, you're going to forget it.
I know in his book, in Stephen King's book on writing, there are really so many gems that I keep coming back to. I did that once recently where I was writing a thriller and I got to 83,000 words and I got an idea for a new book. And like you said, you want to capture it. You have the energy for it. And I thought, all right, well, I'm a little stalled on this one, so I'll just pivot over to this new one. I wrote that new book in 5 months and was excited to get back to the other one. And I found it so difficult to get back to the other one and to put myself back into that world. I thought I would just be able to seamlessly step in there and I learned something about myself. That was hard. That was harder than I thought. Did you have trouble with that when you went back to the previous book?
No, because I knew how it was going to be. Because, like I said, We Know Your Name was when he gets recruited by the agency. One Way Roads was the first time he goes back in time. I'm going to give a spoiler alert. Yes, he stays back in time. And book 3 deals with, some, like I said, the Battle of Britain and another topic in the war. And he's still stuck back in time. So I knew the sequence. But
Mm,
like I said, I thought it was going to end there because at the end of book 3, he says, "You know what? I don't want to deal with Project Pegasus anymore.
mm.
I just want to, spend with my wife, my kids." And basically, that was me telling my readers, "You know what? I'm not writing anymore. I want to do something different." But guess what? Eric got a crazy dream, and guess what? Now there's book 4, and now I'm doing book 5.
All right, so you're working on book 5 now. I was going to ask you what you were working on next.
Yeah, it's Deceptive Protocol, and it's the time between the chapter 1 and We Know Your Name and chapter 2 of We Know Your Name, because there's a 7 year gap.
Mm,
Because
mm,
that 7 year gap, he's a college student. He's a civilian junior analyst for the United States Navy. And, I mentioned his, girlfriend that died in the book, and We Know Your Name. So
mm-hmm,
you see his relationship, how he basically was happy go lucky, had rose colored glasses about, working for the government, and how he gets slowly tarnished.
mm.
She dies in a car accident. He gets really bitter, angry.
Yeah,
He's not happy go lucky anymore. He's just straight face.
yeah. Life has touched him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's what happens. And I think as people, and we bring this into our like complex characters too, like you put Eric through so many challenges in these books, and those challenges shape him and emotionally mature him. And like his personality, it seemed in One Way Roads, your first book, versus in the fourth book, he's changed. He's impacted by loss and by resentment and by uncertainty. And that's how we are as humans too. We're shaped by these things.
Because in the sets of protocol, the book I'm writing now, I put some real events that happened to me.
Mm,
And, I did lose someone I love very much, and my unborn son. So that was in the book. And my wife always asked me to say, "Hey, are you okay? Okay." Because, it's hard to write that. But I
yeah,
also told her it's very therapeutic as well,
I was
because now it's a
wondering.
release.
Yeah. Wow, bless your heart. Well, talk about digging deep to write your books. And I've always kind of said there's no such thing as fiction. So you created Erik with part of your personality, and you're kind of bringing it full circle too.
Mhm.
Erik, one last question. What do you want to leave readers with after they read your latest book?
What I want to leave with them is that, always look at history. Just don't assume that if you want to go back in time, you'll fix it with the ease. As I say, doing the right thing is not always the right thing to do.
Hmm.
And the way I say that mean that is like, yeah, you could go back and kill Hitler and save the world from this monster, but what if it caused something worse? Like I said, doing the right thing is not always the right thing to do.
Hmm. Interesting. Well, thank you for being with us today, Erik.
So,
You've shared some wonderful tidbits, and viewers, you can find Erik's books at erikfoge.com. That's ERIKFOGE.com. And Erik, it's been lovely having you here today. And
you
for
as well.
Thank you. And for those tuning in, enjoy reading the Project Pegasus series, and we will see you next time.